You can talk all day long about the investments inside of your investment plan, but it's also good to structure the investment plan to make sure it works for you. What's up, everyone? Thank you for joining us on the Make Your Money Matter show. Today on the Make Your Money Matter show, we're gonna be talking about how much income you should receive or expect to receive from your investments. You know, as our clients approach retirement age, this question comes up more frequently, but some of you watching and listening right now may actually already be thinking about it. We'll discuss accumulation, distribution, withdrawal rates, and more. But before we do that, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. You know, I'm thinking about this subject before we get started today. There's a song called Atlantis. For those rock and roll fanatics like myself out there, you know this was written by Donovan. His name was Donovan Leitch, the famous rock and roll star of the 60s and 70s. And if you haven't heard this song, look it up. It's a great one. But he's more commonly known, Donovan Leitch, as Donovan. Now, he was a Scottish musician, he was a songwriter, and he composed in a kind of folk rock style. And most of you who've heard him know what I'm talking about there. And in some way, he was, you know, a lot like the Europe's version of Bob Dylan. He was a peer of the Beatles and the Stones, and they all really influenced each other in that generation. And throughout the 60s and into the early 70s, Donovan actually created some of the more commercially successful music of that period. And Atlantis, the song that I'm referencing here, which was released in 1968, became a huge international success. Now, you may remember, for those who didn't know Donovan, in 2001, Disney actually used this song in its animated film Atlantis, The Lost Empire. Donovan's music, you know, quite honestly, has really stood the test of time, in my opinion. And you know, music is often inspired by works of literature and myths that have stood the test of time. So if I were to switch gears for a second, and I asked you, what do Plato, not the child's toy, but the Greek philosopher who lived in 400 BC, and Donovan, who was born in 1946, have in common? Now, I'm asking this for a reason. Here's why. Somewhere around 350 BC, Plato created the legend of Atlantis, the mythical lost island. And the idea of Atlantis was captured, I think, in everyone's imagination for more than 2,000 years. And in 1968, it captured the imagination of Donovan, who again penned the famous song. The story of Atlantis goes as such, which is why I'm bringing it up today on this show. It's kind of complicated, but at its core, there's a simplicity. Atlantis was supposed to be a sophisticated, very modern society possessing more knowledge than any of the other worlds out there. Sound familiar? It was the most technologically advanced solution, if you will, of its time, but there was one fatal flaw in Atlantis. It lacked morality. Definitely sounds familiar, right? It held few men of integrity and character. And ultimately, this resulted in the downfall of the great Atlantis, the empire, which was set out to take over the world. This enraged the gods, such as Poseidon, who ruled over Atlantis. And in his anger, he flooded the empire, relegating it to a grave on the ocean's floor, never to be seen again. So in the words of Donovan, way down below the ocean, where I want to be, she may be. Now, you and I both know Atlantis will never be discovered. Why? It's fictional. It will only be found in the imaginations of men like Donovan. So because the island never existed, being this fictitious place created by Plato, it was serving as a metaphor, right? Resembling actual real places in situations that we've all experienced as human beings. So through the story of Atlantis, Plato was trying to teach us lessons about our own lives. And here's where I'm going with this. You see, the fact that Plato created Atlantis as a morally bankrupt society is less important than the fact that it was a fatally flawed society. And as good as Atlantis was in many ways in this fictional world, it was simultaneously fatally flawed. Atlantis was the most advanced civilization of its day, technologically way ahead of all the others, and militarily all the powers more than others. And it was basically an empire hell-bent on growth and expansion, ultimately world domination. But that myopic view proved to be its downfall. You see, Atlantis had no vision of self-preservation or sustainability. Its only concern was with what? Growth, growth, growth. And from the collision of those two opposing objectives growth versus sustainability, Plato wanted to teach us lessons and in other areas of our lives, essentially. And in today's world, one of those areas can certainly be for preparing for retirement, back to our original topic of today's episode. And around the question in particular is, how much can I receive from my investments? And the bridge I'm trying to make there is that we may have fear going into retirement, being in this accumulation phase, this growth phase, and we need to take the other side of the coin on this one. We need to understand that ultimately, at some point, we're going to go from attributing and contributing to asset buildup to ultimately distributing. And it has a lot to do with the difference between growing your assets and sustaining your assets. Back to our Atlantis metaphor, growing versus sustaining. In other words, accumulating those assets or being in the accumulation phase, as I mentioned, of your life, those working and saving years versus the distribution phase of your life, ultimately is your retirement years. And you've probably heard me talk about the journey to and through retirement, either on my radio show, the podcast, or this show. And I like sharing stories that are analogous to retirement planning and investment planning because it helps us understand that investment planning and retirement planning aren't just singular topics. They're dynamic. They're three-dimensional. They need to be put together with an entire plan, integrated, that is all moving in one direction at the same time. And the first phase of your working life is what I call the accumulation phase. This is where you're building your retirement. It spans, let's say, 40 years. Let's say roughly between ages 25 and 65. And these are the decades where you're diligently saving money, either through company-sponsored retirement plans or personally putting money aside yourself, and you're taking on investment risk, right? You're understanding that the market has risk, and hopefully you're working with a good advisor. And if you're not, this is where someone like One Capital or here through the show, Make Your Money Matter, can come in, because you want to be able to set that time with someone to be able to help you build your retirement. Now, in all your efforts to grow your nest egg, to expand your retirement savings, your goal in this phase is growing your assets, right? Growth. Understanding what your assets that you save for your entire life can ultimately do for you. The old saying of work smarter, not harder, means a lot of having your money work for you instead of you working for your money. You see, the accumulation phase and the distribution phase are two very different phases, and the investment activities and the overall retirement plan that goes with it that worked for those in one phase may not and probably won't work for the other. No different than Atlantis. The growth aspect of their myopic point of view ultimately was their demise. We cannot, and I want to share this, and being a financial advisor of nearly 20 years, I share this that often from experience, is that we have to be careful that we take the same mindset that we've had for 30 or 40 years into retirement, expecting it to do and have the same result as it once had. Once you exit the accumulation phase and enter that distribution phase, the rules change. Not a little bit, actually a lot. I mentioned on an early episode around the Sherpa, around, if you go back and watch or listen to that episode, if you haven't, and what's so analogous around retirement planning and hiking up a mountain is it's a lot of work, hard work. But believe it or not, the hike up the mountain, in my analogy, is actually and proves to be the easier route than actually descending or going down the mountain. So in your retirement journey, or your investment planning journey, understanding that getting down the mountain effectively and efficiently is paramount to making sure that all that work you did for 30 or 40 years to save those monies, that it actually ends up working for you in retirement. And Americans, look, across the board, we're living longer, and that's great. We've had a lot of technological and technical advances in the medical field, but with that comes more of a concern that we're seeing here with our clients when it comes to the question of, do I have enough money, which is one question. And the second one is, will I always have enough money? You have to understand that they often are asking, and many of you watching or listening right now are saying the same things, do I have enough money to get me all the way through retirement, especially if I live through my 90s? And the question of how much income can I receive from my income, and what that goes into, and what we do here at our firm in particular, is understanding what your spending rate as a percent of your liquid assets mean. Now, what is that? Your withdrawal rate. This is the younger brother of the rate of return family. Everyone loves talking about the rate of return, but no one really likes talking about the spending rate, and that matters. If you got to backstop the withdrawal rate against your rate of return, this is the sustainability rate, meaning what is the sustainable withdrawal rate or distribution rate you can have in retirement? Whatever age you are watching this or listening to this, understand this. Knowing your withdrawal rate at some point is as important as knowing what your rate of return or what you're shooting for and your goal for rate of return. So first and foremost in retirement, your measure of success as an investor really changes from beating the market to ensuring income for life. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, that accumulation stage and that accumulation phase and the distribution phase are very different. Now, indeed, when retirees think about risk, many say that the big risk right now is outliving their money is the number one fear. We all have that. We understand that. That's when you're going from making your money with these to all of a sudden like having some random guy in a black sweater tell you this is how you need to be spending your money. It sets home for our clients as we walk in to retirement. And I will say this as an advisor, and many of our advisors I've spoken with here at the firm, we'll see that our clients entering into retirement, the fear and the anxiety has actually changed because we're making sure that they're growing the assets so they will have enough. And making, again, the term we use here at One Capital Management is simple and elegant. So understanding your plan in a simple and elegant way is also understanding your withdrawal rate, which is important. That answers the question of what should I be expecting or what can I expect from my savings in retirement? And if your advisor, by the way, is not speaking to you about that, make sure to bring it up with them or give someone a call. If you want to call us, you can. And you might be thinking, okay, well, wait. So we talked about spending as a percent of liquid assets. What is a withdrawal rate and what does that mean? It is the number that provides context for the amount you take out of your portfolio in any given year in retirement. And it's expressed as a percentage of your overall assets. A simple way to determine that number is a simple math calculation. You do not have to have a CFP like I do or a series exam or have 20 years in the business to understand this calculation. So follow me here. It's basically your cash outflow per month minus your inflow. So understand what you have coming in divided by your assets. So essentially using a round number as a hypothetical here for a second. Let's say in retirement you have $1 million between IRAs, trust accounts, Roth IRAs, whatever it might be, you have $1 million saved. It's $1 million. And I'm not going to include real estate here for the time being because I just want to include liquid assets. And we'll talk about real estate here in a little bit too. So at $1 million, if you have a $10,000 a month going out for your lifestyle, that's what you need to live. And you have $8,000 coming in, whether that's from pensions or Social Security or maybe rental income or other sources of income, your net need per month is what? $2,000. 10,000 minus 8,000 gets you to $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month multiplied by 12 to get an annual number is $24,000 a year. $24,000 a year divided by 1 million is 2.4%. All right, time out. You're probably thinking, Brad, that was a lot of math, okay? What does that actually mean? This is why I say this word often is context. What does 2.4% mean? It's just a number. Well, that's essentially your withdrawal rate. Now, our job is to make sure that you understand what that, or any advisor I should say, is to make sure you understand what that means for you and what it means as a whole. That's a role of a good private wealth advisor. And overall, the sustainability for your retirement plan. So let's talk about that for a second. The withdrawal rate is affected by not just your income, by the way, but it also includes the income sources I mentioned all across the board, whether it's Social Security, pensions, or things like that. So understanding your withdrawal rate, what it is first and foremost, and then the sustainability is what's so important. So when planning for your retirement, your calculation of this is vital. Simply put, and I'm going to be very clear about this, you want to choose an amount you can withdraw annually from your portfolio and still be reasonably certain you will not run out of money during your retirement. A sustainable withdrawal rate, it typically points to the initial rate you start out with retirement. Now, many studies have gone through this, and you can Google this and you can look at some research behind this. We'll talk a little bit about this. And many studies have done over time, going back to the original study done in 1994 by a guy named William Bengen. He found out that a 4% initial withdrawal rate was 100% successful over 30-year rolling periods dating all the way back to 1926. So essentially, if you think about that for a second, a retiree could have withdrawn $40,000 from $1 million portfolio and increased that $40,000 every year by inflation and theoretically never run out of money over any 30-year period. But to be fair, your individual sustainable withdrawal rate will differ from someone else's, and it'll differ in really three ways. Number one, the the retirement planning horizon. That's big. Your years in retirement. I always say this to our clients. We can dial in your retirement plan, to have the last $20 for an in and out double. If I was playing God here, I could have it dialed in perfectly, but we aren't God and we can't play that, right? So we have to have that conversation, and we have to understand that we have to leave some room to adjust for a lot of things, right? Things like inflation in the investing world, other things like long-term care and those kind of items in your later years for planning. So it can be adjusted by the time horizon as well in retirement. Now, the other one that would be affected is your portfolio mix, how you're allocated, something we talk about here. And those of you who watch and listen to the show understand this. Again, that's where having an advisor to come in and sit with you to understand where your risks lie with regards to also the sustainability of those distributions in retirement, because it's different than your accumulation phase. Remember, in the retirement phase, you still want to be growth oriented, but we're looking at more of a preservation and an income oriented portfolio. So the portfolio mix, the stocks and bonds in particular, has a lot to do with how your withdrawal rate may differ from someone else's. And the third one I'll bring up would be the probability of success you are comfortable with. For example, 85% probability or 95% probability. And we've gone through that before in what's called a Monte Carlo scenario. And we have to go through that to understand what probability you're okay with as it pertains to your risk and your portfolio. So whether either you're planning for retirement or you're currently retired right now, you should consider those three variables to help determine your withdrawal rate. And it should be noted, as you're probably thinking right now, while it's important to start with a sustainable rate and work with your advisor, and you should be in a conversation about this, we also know your situation will change and the markets will not always perform as expected. I mean, if they did, you wouldn't need an advisor, right? You wouldn't need portfolio diversification. It just goes up and up and up. So having that active manager, having that diversified portfolio, the rebalancing of the portfolio to manage the risks inside the markets, the volatility that happens, is really important to having a simple and elegant coordinated plan that adapts for the changes that may or may not come, right? And the one thing we know is, the one thing for certain is there will be uncertain times, right? So even though the initial withdrawal rate studies attempted to take all of this into consideration, monitoring your withdrawal rate as you move through retirement is still really important. It's really, it's in order to maintain the level of success you're comfortable with. And I wanna mention one other study, and it's called the Trinity Study. And this can assist in understanding the sustainable withdrawal rate and can be used as really a guideline. And I mean that as a true guideline. And in this Trinity Study, it illustrates historical successes using 6 different time horizons, 5 asset mixes, and 10 withdrawal rates. So let me go through that for a second. The 6 different time horizons they use was basically years of 15 to 40 years in retirement. So whether you're saying 15 years in retirement or 40 years. So again, understanding, where you think you'll be retiring and how many years you have. And again, that's an assumption, but it starts there. You have to assume some things in planning. The next one is the 5 asset mixes, and it shows it from basically 100% bonds to 100% stocks. And then the third one is they use 10 different withdrawal rates, everything from a 3% to a 12% withdrawal rate. So they expanded the Bengen study to confirm the work. And I just mentioned showing that a 4% withdrawal rate over a 30-year retirement horizon with as an example, 50-50 mix, meaning allocation, meaning 50% equities and 50% fixed income of stocks and bonds was 100% successful. Now, you might be thinking, well, Brad, if you're telling me it's 100% successful, why wouldn't I go with that? Well, you understand these studies are also done on historical data. So we have to remember that we have to use those to our advantage, but also manage the risk going forward. And again, partnering with someone that you trust and understand and who is enrolled in the process of your portfolio management. And a lot of advisors out there, something that I really love about what we do here at One Capital Management is all of our advisors, we involve you in the process. And a lot of our clients go, hey, look, we trust you. We want you to do it, but we want you to know, and any good advisor wants you to know what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing with your investments. Because those specific things in your portfolio, the more you know, the better. And why I wanted to bring this subject up today, regards to knowing your distribution rate, has a lot to do with your rate of return and ultimately answers the question of what you should be expecting as income in retirement. And as I've shared many times before, a rate of return that everyone loves talking about, I'm making 10% over here or I'm doing 8% over here. But when you get into retirement, remember, being mindful of the growth, that Atlantis mentality, the really understanding, when you get into retirement, the one goal you really should be looking for is if you're talking about just the rate of return, it will always only be one half of the story. I want to repeat that. Your rate of return will always be one half of the story. The other half is how much you're going to be taking from those investments. So understanding your withdrawal rate, I would argue, is almost more paramount and important and probably primary to even understanding how your assets should be managed or should be growing. So the more knowledge you have about this, the better. And to put a bow on this subject today, a couple of years ago, the Wall Street Journal, they carried an article and it was titled, "The Mental Mistakes We Make with Retirement Spending." You can look this up. And the article speaks to this very point, the need to make a shift, as I mentioned before, from accumulation activities to distribution activities. Remember, Atlantis, we don't want to fail because we only focus on growth. Essentially understanding your income needs, understanding your withdrawal rate, and making sure that it works in context as you go from the accumulation phase to the distribution phase. Remember, the old saying is old habits die hard. And in quoting from this article, and I quote, "Imagine spending a lifetime acquiring habits that offer the promise of a longer, happier, and more fulfilling life. Then imagine that having that fulfilling life, you suddenly must abandon all of those habits." It's not easy, right? But that's what happens when people go from working into retirement. Old habits die hard. Remember, we don't want to become the failed, beautiful city that Atlantis was because we focus on growth. That was its ultimate demise. So as we are sitting here, for those watching and listening, whether you're in your 30s or 40s and retirement's way off, or maybe you're at retirement's doorstep, make sure to check in with your advisor or give us a call to make sure that we understand how you want to fit into making sure that, hey, I was doing this for 30 or 40 years. I want to get into retirement. I probably need to think a little bit differently. All right. Now's the part of the show we want to answer your questions. If you have a question or a topic you'd like me to address, you can leave a comment or question in the comment section. Or if it's something a bit more personal or you want to talk one-on-one, just go to the About page on this channel and you can send us an email. We'll always keep the questions I read here anonymous, so you never have to worry about your name being shared, but we'd love to hear from you. The question came in is, what is the typical sustainable retirement amount of years that most Americans have? I'll answer it this way. Those studies I mentioned, the Trinity Study and the Bengen Study, they were run on 25-year retirement years. So again, not playing God here for a second, but whether he calls you up a week after or you live into your late 90s, that's really up to him. But the reality is we need to plan. There's really two ways to do planning, right? There's needs-based planning and there's goal-based planning. Needs-based forms this idea that we need to make sure that we have the assets sustainable to fund all of the needs that you'll have in retirement. Ultimately, you put your wants on top of that. There's two four-letter words I use often, need and want, in retirement. So we have to understand what your needs are, and then we can actually layer on your wants there. But most of these studies are run on 25 years. That also has to do with national retirement age being around 66 and 67. So, depending on your health, longevity in the family, you want to kind of look at it that way. But I would say anywhere between 20 and 25 years is a good number to use in terms of the normal amount of years in retirement. Now, again, if you have a question or comment you'd like me to read on the show here at Make Your Money Matter, you can leave it in the comments section or you can email us in the About page on our channel. And before we go today, if you found this show helpful and anything we talked about today helpful and want to learn more, you can visit us on our website at onecapital.com, or you can scan the QR code on the screen with your smartphone and that'll get you there. You can also call or text us. We want to help. Listen, there's no pressure here. We don't treat people like a number. In fact, we value relationships. It's the lifeblood of what we do. So click, call, or text today. And by the way, if you're not following us on social media, you should be. We're sharing great information on all of our social media platforms. And as I often say when we end the show, if you enjoyed the show today, share it with someone you like. And if you don't like it, I guess share it with someone you don't like. But until next week, always remember to make your money matter.